The civil rights era isn't one that is over, right? Isn't one that we are seeing the second phase of. It's a continuation of that. What good is having the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy a hamburger? That was the question Martin Luther King asked 60 years ago after the now iconic Greensboro sit-in. The point was not to minimize the importance of ending legal segregation, but to illustrate that in the Black struggle, economic justice and racial justice are not merely fighting to tear down systems of oppression in the criminal justice system. We are fighting to tear down systems of oppression that exist in housing, in education, in healthcare, in employment, and in the very air we breathe. Because in America today, white families have 42 times more wealth than Black families. When we say housing is a human right and we need to guarantee homes for all, we are speaking to the fact that home ownership rates are nearly twice as high for white families as they are for Black families. And here in Minnesota, it's triple. And people of color are more likely to face eviction and homelessness. When we introduce legislation like the Zero Waste Act or a Green New Deal, it is because we know that environmental racism is very real for our communities. Whether it is living near incinerators in North Minneapolis, a proximity to power plants and factories, higher exposure to emissions from pollution, the disproportionate harm that disasters like Hurricane Katrina caused to Black communities, or even access to basic things like clean water, we are bearing the burden of environmental catastrophe. When we say healthcare is a human right and that every American deserves free healthcare, we are speaking to the fact that Black people are 50% more likely to be uninsured than white people in this country. And as Ayana always says, when America gets a cold, Black Americans get pneumonia. Our communities are the ones bearing the burden of the coronavirus more than any other. People of color make up disproportionate share of low-wage essential workers who have had to keep working in food processing plants, grocery stores, and other workplaces, despite risk to their health. We are also facing higher rates of joblessness related to COVID-19 crisis, while also suffering racialized police brutality and militarization. And the mortality rate for Black Americans with the coronavirus is twice as high as it is with other races. This for me is very personal. I lost my own father to the coronavirus, and I see the pain and the havoc it's wreaking on the Black immigrant community here in Minneapolis. The crisis we are seeing right now is the result of decades of social and economic neglect. Our communities are desperately crying out for change and rejecting the status quo, because the status quo has failed them for decades and continues to fail them, even as Americans die by the tens of thousands. Our response to this neglect cannot be written with the same playbook that got us here in the first place. We must recognize that these systems of oppression are linked. We can't have a world where we care about working people and not build a social fabric that lifts up all working people. And as Ayana says, we can't say Black Lives Matter without having those words be legislated, and recognizing that requires sacrifice, shared sacrifice. So yes, we have to reimagine what public safety should look like, not just here in Minneapolis, but across the country. And yes, we need to invest in reparations to right a historical wrong. But we also need to embed policies within the system to make it more equitable. A Green New Deal is a racial equity policy. Medicare for all is a racial equity policy. Homes for all is a racial equity policy. Canceling student debt is a racial equity policy. And in closing, we have to be clear that our destinies are linked together. That my destiny, your destiny, and the destiny of everyone across the world is interlinked. So creating a path to peace in our foreign policy is a racial equity policy. And when we build systems that recognize the inherent value and dignity of every single human being, only then will the words Black Lives Matter truly be a reflection of our institutions. It is a great honor to have the opportunity to be in community with you all, to have the privilege and the honor of not only organizing with you, to be in the streets with you, but to be part of a group of lawmakers who are legislating with you. Thank you all so much for having me, and I look forward to the days that we can have these conversations in person.